So chapter 16 of Boruto's Two Blue Vortex is out, and while no big fights or anything crazy happened, the chapter was stuffed to the gills with everything from exposition on how Boruto's Flying Raijin and Kashin Koji's 10 paths work, to setting up protocols on how to deal with Jura in the upcoming chapters, and with cliffhangers establishing a battle between Matsuri, Ryu, and Team 7. So while yes, there was no Jinchuriki transformation or unlocking of a karma marking, there's still a lot to talk about from this chapter. And as crazy as it sounds, the most interesting part of the entire chapter was the protocol that's now been set up on how Konoha is going to deal with Jura in upcoming chapters. See, because usually I say if the good guys have drafted up a protocol on how to deal with the main antagonist of the manga, usually that protocol involves a plan on how to defeat that antagonist. But Boruto is anything but ordinary, apparently, because the grand protocol on how to deal with Jura in the upcoming chapters of Two Blue Vortex is to leave him alone. Yes, you heard me right. Kashin Koji, from a toad that emerged from Ada's hair, told Shikamaru, our current Hokage, if Jura comes to the village, not only should Shikamaru not attack him, but that Shikamaru should treat him like every other citizen. Because as it currently stands, the collective forces of good guys have a 1 in a million shot of defeating Jura if he gets serious. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I can't remember a time in any manga where it was ever established that the entire combined fighting forces of all the powers of good stood a 1 in a million chance of defeating the main antagonist of an arc. And thus today, I want to talk about that protocol that's been established. I want to talk about Konoha's future and how Jura plays a massive role in it. Because the establishment of this non-violence protocol against Jura could mean one of two things. Either there will never be a battle against Jura, and Jura will exist as an entity on Earth operating as a neutral faction with an infinite amount of power that nobody is willing to test, or there is a grand plan in motion from Kashin Koji and Boruto to combine the forces of multiple different entities to battle against Jura on a somewhat equal playing ground. And I find both of those possibilities equally interesting. And thus, that's what we're going to be talking about today, because today we're talking Jura is invincible. But before we get to talking about anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. But before we get into all that, today we got to talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Raycon. Listen, you might have heard me talk about Raycon's everyday earbuds before and thought to yourself, there's genuinely no way I can get the same audio quality as all other competitors for half the price. I'm here to tell you once again, yes, you can. See, Raycon has sold over 3 million pairs of their previous generation of everyday earbuds, but now they've made improvements. See, because if ever there was a time to check out Raycon, now is that time, as they've released the upgraded version of their best-selling everyday earbuds. As these earbuds have an even more ergonomic design than the previous generation, have multi-point connectivity that allows you to connect to multiple devices simultaneously, and active noise cancellation, so anything you don't want to hear, you don't have to. Not to mention the everyday earbuds are available in multiple colorways. However, I'm a bit of a fundamentalist. I like them in black. However, there's a lot of other things I love about everyday earbuds, like the fact that they have a 32-hour battery life, a quick charge function that yields 90 minutes of listening time in 10 minutes of charging, and they're completely weatherproof and sweat resistant, which means when I'm in the gym sweating up a storm, I don't have to worry about these things breaking on me. But speaking of the gym, I've genuinely never found earbuds that work as well as these in the gym. I sweat up a storm. I'm shaking around. I'm trying to listen to my audiobooks or Otaku's Anonymous on Spotify, but when my ears get sweaty, my earbuds always fall out. That's not the case with Raycons. So what are you guys waiting for? Head to buyraycon.com/nchammer23 or click the link in my description box to get up to 30% off your Raycon order today, plus free shipping. If you thought I was affordable before, wait until you use Nick's link. So it's been established in chapter 16 that Jura is officially on the no punch list. Kashin Koji basically told Shikamaru, treat Jura like your average, if not above average Konoha citizen. That is to say that if Jura comes into town and goes to a bookstore, all bookstore owners should be advised to treat Jura like their #1 customer. On top of that, Jura shouldn't be attacked under any means while in Konoha. But how can Kashin Koji tell Shikamaru to treat Jura, this incredibly powerful supposed monster, with this level of nonchalantness? Well, it's because Jura has seemingly taken an interest in Konoha. See, prior to this protocol being established, Kashin Koji also told Shikamaru to not let Himawari leave Konoha for any reason whatsoever. And this is because if Himawari were to leave Konoha at any point, she would be immediately targeted by Jura. However, so long as Himawari stays in Konoha, she should be safe from Jura. Now, that's because Jura seems to know that if he were to come for Himawari in the center of Konoha, it would lead to a massive amount of destruction. Not only because he's incredibly powerful, but also because Himawari's incredibly powerful, and because a lot of people in Konoha don't want to see a child get abducted. And therefore, because Jura has interest in Konoha from an archaeological, philosophical, and scientific perspective, he doesn't want to destroy something he doesn't know everything about. Now, obviously, there's also the plot convenience of this reasoning. Yeah, okay, Jura doesn't want to kidnap Himawari and Konoha because he doesn't want to destroy Konoha. Seems like a pretty easy way to excuse Jura just not pulling up and abducting Himawari whenever he wants when Boruto is off fighting against the lower-ranking Shinju somewhere very, very far away from Konoha. But that's fine because technically it is in line with who Jura is as a character. Jura's sole motivation since awakening has been the acquiring of knowledge, and one could argue that the only reason that Jura wants to consume Naruto and or Himawari in the first place is the acquirement of knowledge. See, because here's the thing. Jura and the rest of the Shinju can't necessarily be faulted for wanting to consume the people that they're fascinated with. All of the Shinju were created from claw grimes, and all of the claw grimes were created from the Ten Tails. And the Ten Tails' sole purpose in life is to eat as many things as possible until eventually an Otsutsuki falls into its mouth and it can turn into a divine tree. And therefore, the sole reason for the Ten Tails, the claw grimes, and technically the Shinju to exist is to eat until they find an Otsutsuki. Now, while the Shinju are actively trying to rally against their more biological urges, that doesn't mean that their biological urges aren't going to subliminally direct them. And that's exactly what's going on with the Shinju right now. See, all of the Shinju are trying to figure out who they are. The human side of them is telling them who they loved most in their previous life. For Hidari, it's Sarada. For Bug, it's Ada. For Matsuri, it's Konohamaru, so on and so forth. And after the Shinju were created, they only really understood two things about themselves: their human side and their claw grime side. That is to say, the love of a human and the need to consume of a claw grime. And therefore, in order to figure out who they are as Shinju, they're combining those two wants to consume the people they loved as humans, with the hopes that by consuming them, they'll gain access to all the information that they want and figure out exactly who they are. And therefore, technically, their pursuit of these desires isn't necessarily evil. Yes, it seems evil because they're talking about eating people, but in the same way that the Standard Titans in Attack on Titan were consuming as many people as possible with the hopes that one of them would be a Titan shifter so they could turn back to being a human, this process of consuming people isn't necessarily rooted in evil. And I believe that might be a message that Ikimoto is going to try and eke past us in the next couple of chapters. See, because whether you like it or not, the establishment of this protocol means that Jura's gonna be in Konoha, and not as an antagonist. There'd be no narrative or plot reason to establish this protocol and then never have Jura waltz into Konoha looking for books. And therefore, at some point in the upcoming chapters, we are gonna see Jura go on a little shopping spree, and everybody in Konoha's gonna just have to be fine with that. And I believe during this time when Jura is waltzing through Konoha, some important conversations are gonna be had between him and possibly important members from Konoha, like Shikamaru, Kawaki, or maybe even Himawari. Now, while I wouldn't put the child within grabbing distance of Jura when Jura's walking through Konoha, unfortunately, it's pretty much been established that whatever Jura wants to do, he can do. See, because the reason this protocol was established in the first place is because Kashin Koji highlighted the fact that if Jura were to get serious about fighting Konoha, they would have a 1 in a million chance of victory. 1 in a million! And mind you, this was Kashin Koji saying this, the person who knows exactly how strong Boruto is. The person who actively watched Boruto with a Rasengan Uzihiko piece up the second strongest Shinju, or at least the person who should be the second strongest Shinju in Hidari. I mean, Boruto is now basically one-shot two of the most powerful people in this universe, Code and Hidari. And yet Kashin Koji highlighted the fact that if Jura was to get serious, the entire combined forces of humanity's strongest soldiers would stand a 1 in a million shot of victory. Now, this isn't necessarily the end of the world. It's already been established multiple times that Boruto is walking an infinitesimally small tightrope through an infinite amount of possible futures. And therefore, what's 1 in a million odds for a character who's been up against 1 in a million odds since the beginning of his story? But don't for a second think that I'm saying that Boruto stands a chance at defeating Jura. If Kashin Koji doesn't think it's a possibility, it's probably not a possibility. At least, not yet. See, because here's the thing. If the combined forces of all the powers of good are well and truly powerless against Jura, they only have 2 options: live with Jura or get strong enough to defeat him. And like I said in the beginning of this video, I find both of these possibilities equally interesting, though not equally likely. So let's talk about the possibility I find less likely first. And that is, could you guess it, living with Jura. See, because while I do understand that the possibility of Jura moving into Konoha to try and figure out as much information as possible would lead to some rather interesting conversations about whether or not his evil nature is actually evil, if Jura were to move into Konoha on the infinite quest of knowledge, it would kind of invalidate literally every other character in the story. If Jura is well and truly leaps and bounds more powerful than Boruto, Kawaki, and all the other combined forces of good, if he were to join the forces of good, there would be no reason for Boruto, Kawaki, or any of the other forces of good to exist. Ironically, this is kind of the same argument we made for Daemon and Ada joining Konoha. However, Daemon and Ada have done a good job of remaining a neutral force in Konoha that doesn't necessarily get involved in Konoha's battles. Because Daemon could have absolutely flown away from Ada's lap to fight against Jura and Hidaru when they pulled up in Konoha, but he didn't, because Daemon is singularly focused on Ada, and therefore if Ada doesn't command him to do something, then he's not going to do it, and Ada isn't going to command him to leave her side because the bug Shinju is out there. And therefore, when it boils down to it, the only real way that we can take Daemon's consideration into strength when talking about Konoha is when we consider the fact that at some point the bug Shinju is going to pull up to consume Ada, and at that point Daemon's going to have to fight. But in all other matters that don't involve Ada, Daemon's not going to be involved, and therefore him coming to Konoha hasn't necessarily been a bad thing. Now you can make the argument that if Jura were to come to Konoha in the pursuit of knowledge, there'd really be no motivation for him or anybody strong enough to properly motivate him to help Konoha in any battle. However, the idea of Konoha bending a knee not only to Ada and Daemon, but also bending a knee to Jura doesn't necessarily sit right with me. Like, yeah, I get it, we're in an era of peace, but I don't know if I agree with the idea of letting every antagonist who's not necessarily super evil, but definitely powerful enough to be a pain in our ass if we decided to fight against them, just live in Konoha scot-free. We've done it with Ada, we've done it with Daemon, we've done it with Amado. And ironically, the best decision out of those three is Ada, who many would assume, outside of her subconscious use of omnipotence, is the least powerful out of those three. And honestly, her usefulness to Konoha was only recently established in chapter 16, because it was revealed that she's actively working with Shikamaru, keeping him privy to the movings of everything going on outside of Konoha, especially with the Shinju. But I'm off track here. While I do think Jura living in Konoha could lead to some interesting conversations, I don't think it's the direction this manga is going. On top of that, now that it's been established that Jura has a vested interest in making sure that Konoha is not destroyed, the fact that we know that Konoha does get destroyed from the first episode in the first chapter of Boruto seems to hint at the fact that Jura will not be living in Konoha peacefully, because if somebody else was trying to destroy Konoha, a place he doesn't want to see destroyed, he would stop them, which implies that the only way that Konoha could be destroyed is if Jura wasn't around to defend it. And therefore that leads us to what I identify as our infinitely more possible possibility that we're only placating Jura for the time being until the allied forces of good are strong enough to take him out. But what does that mean? And how are the allied forces of good going to get strong enough to defeat somebody they currently have a 1 in a million shot at defeating? Well, the answer most likely lies in the last chapter of Boruto, chapter 15. See, because it was in chapter 15 that Boruto told Kawaki about the limiters that Amado had placed on it. Limiters that actively limit Kawaki's offensive abilities while overmaxing his defensive and regenerative abilities. All to ensure that A, Kawaki doesn't die, and B, to make sure that he doesn't get too powerful that Delta can't take him over whenever Amado needs to use Kawaki as a vessel for Akebi, his daughter's rebirth. But if you think about it, the idea of Boruto revealing to Kawaki, a person Boruto very much knows wants to kill him, that he has limiters placed on him and that he can get those limiters off, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If anything, Boruto revealing to Kawaki that he can get more powerful is basically the worst thing that Boruto could do for himself, because as of chapter 1 of Two Blue Vortex, it was established that there was basically no human on Earth that stood a chance in a battle against Boruto, as Boruto was able to almost effortlessly take out Code. And while obviously there's the Shinju, who stand a fair to good chance in a battle against Boruto even at their lowest level, the Shinju are not the final antagonists of this story. Kawaki is, and it's not like Boruto knows that, but at the end of the day, Boruto does understand that Kawaki is openly antagonistic towards him. And while you can make the argument that Boruto telling Kawaki that he has limiters placed on him by Amado is just the brotherly thing to do, at the end of the day, the real reason that Boruto told Kawaki about his limiters is because Boruto needs Kawaki's strength. I mean, and Boruto even says this himself, saying that those Shinju are no regular enemies, especially Jura. I can't take him down by myself, I need your help. And thus seems infinitely more likely to me that Boruto and Kawaki are going to work together to take out Jura. And even though Jura has been confirmed now multiple times to be a humanoid version of the Ten Tails that was used to make the Claw Grimes, that still doesn't necessarily explain how he came into being. But I believe in the next couple of chapters that will be established. And the truth of the matter will reveal that Jura's creation has a lot to do with either Ishiki or Jigen. And this is something that we've talked about at length. The cosmetic similarities are too much to ignore. On top of that, there's very strong narrative and plot reasons for Ishiki or Jigen to be connected to Jura. Even more so after the events of chapter 15 and 16, as it's being established that the fight against Jura is not going to be shouldered by Boruto alone, but instead by Boruto and Kawaki. Now, Boruto has a built-in reason to battle against Jura. Jura's trying to eat his little sister and his father. And while one could argue that Kawaki has the same reasons, from a reader's perspective, those points don't motivate as well for Kawaki as they do for Boruto. and therefore a connection being made between Kawaki and Jura through the form of either Jigen or Ishiki is not only a good way to not have Kawaki feel as though he's tacked on to this battle, but also a really good way to explain how Konoha gets destroyed. See, because the more that I think about it, the less that it makes sense that at some point during Two Blue Vortex, Konoha is going to be destroyed. It was just established in this chapter that Jura is actively trying to make sure that Konoha doesn't get destroyed. Add then to the fact that neither Boruto or Kawaki want to see Konoha destroyed because it's both of their homes, and the idea that for some reason the entirety of Konoha gets destroyed when the three strongest people in the universe don't want it to be destroyed doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Unless it's Kawaki's fault. See, of the three people that are supposedly going to be involved in this incredibly tumultuous and violent battle, Kawaki has the least interest and the least connection to Konoha. Boruto was born and raised there. Jura doesn't want to see it destroyed for archaeological, historic, and scientific reasons, but Kawaki has only lived there for the last couple of years, and Kawaki doesn't seem to have much interest in literally anybody who lives in Konoha outside of Himawari and Naruto, two people who are either strong enough to avoid being destroyed in this battle, or who couldn't be affected by the destruction of Konoha because they're currently trapped in the Daikoku-ten. And therefore, unfortunately, Kawaki has the most reason to do something stupid within the bounds of Konoha. See, we've already talked about the point that at some point Jura is going to be casually strolling through Konoha. Now, the plan to not attack Jura is absolutely going to be disseminated down to Kawaki. In fact, out of all the people who need to hear that plan, he's probably the #1 person. However, Kawaki has a pretty famously short temper, and is pretty well known for rushing into battles that he knows he can't win. In fact, after Jura and Hidari pulled up in Konoha the first time and made Christmas tree ornaments out of the wall guards, it was Delta and Kawaki who flew into battle against them first, only for Kawaki to get absolutely manhandled by the likes of Jura and Hidari. And even after being kicked halfway across the city and actively being discouraged by Delta, who said, hey, you just got kicked halfway across the city, do you have a plan to fight these guys before you fly back? Kawaki still flew back with no plan. And that's what we call, ladies and gentlemen, blind confidence. Now, Kawaki is able to do this because inherently he is very powerful, not comparatively to Jura, but still very powerful. And therefore one could argue that even if Kawaki was told to not attack Jura when he sees him walking around the village, that Kawaki could still go through with an attack on Jura. That point only gets strengthened when you consider the fact that at some point it will be revealed that Jura has a connection to either Jigen or Ishiki, and therefore Kawaki will view Jura as the last vestige of the man who abused him his entire childhood. And if you thought Kawaki's temper was short now, wait until he hears that. But it only gets worse for Kawaki, at least so far as his patience is concerned, because Kawaki was recently told by Boruto that the reason that he's losing all these fights is because his offensive capabilities have been limited by Amado, and therefore you'd be a fool to assume that Kawaki hasn't either already gone to Amado or is currently on his way to him. And Kawaki, who's supposed to be a living symbol of the idea that you need to work for the strength that you have, is going to unlock a new version of strength, and that new version of strength is going to make him more powerful than a lot of his foes, but not more powerful than his most powerful foe, Jura. In that regard, Kawaki is going to follow a very similar arc to Majin Vegeta. Yeah, Majin Vegeta was able to go toe-to-toe with the likes of Goku, but he wasn't strong enough to go up against Buu. And I believe Kawaki is about to undergo a very, and I mean very similar arc. Because even though things seem chill with Kawaki right now, Kawaki is still the main antagonist of the story. And access to additional power in the form of more offensive output is going to make Kawaki a legitimate threat. Now, is he going to be a legitimate threat to the likes of Boruto? Maybe. I mean, at some point he has to be. This confidence that comes with an offensive boost in strength, coupled with the fact that Jura is going to be revealed to be connected to Ishiki or Jigen at some point, will be enough from Kawaki to ignore the words from Shikamaru in the back of his head telling him to not attack Jura. And thus I believe that the battle that Jura is trying to actively avoid in Konoha is unfortunately going to be brought to his front doorstep. And therefore I believe that the reason that Konoha gets destroyed and Boruto and Kawaki face off against each other with bumps, bruises, and blood all over them is because immediately prior to the battle that we see starting in chapter 1 of Boruto was the battle that Boruto and Kawaki had against Jura in Konoha. Because think about it, the second that Jura is defeated, Kawaki really has no reason to cooperate with Boruto. The only reason that Kawaki is willingly working with Boruto right now is because he just got his teeth kicked down his throat by Jura. And the first thing that Boruto said to Kawaki when he appeared on the stone faces was, hey, want to get stronger? I have a super easy way for you to do it. In fact, it's so easy it could basically be identified as cheating. And while I'm not going to sit here and say that Konoha being destroyed because of Kawaki's recklessness is a good thing, narratively the foundation has been set for this exact thing to happen, because it all ties back to Himawari's vase. Those of you who don't remember, Himawari's vase is one of the most important talking points revolving around Kawaki's integration into the Uzumaki family. In the earlier parts of Boruto, when Kawaki was first being introduced to the Uzumaki family, Himawari had made a vase, a flower vase with sunflowers, aka Himawari's, painted on it. However, one day, because of Kawaki's outbursts of anger and recklessness, he ends up breaking Himawari's vase. And a large talking point that ties directly back to the through line that runs throughout the entirety of Kawaki's character development arc, which is you need to work hard to get the things in life life that you deserve was reflected in this arc when Kawaki couldn't understand why Himawari was so upset about her vase being destroyed. Because Himawari had worked hard for that vase. It was a testament to her artistic talent and took time and effort. And therefore, when Kawaki not only didn't understand why Himawari was upset, but also said that he would just buy her a new vase to replace it, established immediately a difference in the way that the Uzumaki family went about achieving strength and the way that Kawaki went about achieving strength. Therefore, over the course of this arc, Kawaki slowly but surely remakes Himawari's vase, collecting all of the pieces and gluing them back together until eventually the vase is completely remade. And this makes Himawari happy enough to forgive Kawaki for breaking the vase in the first place. And this is an important lesson that the entirety of the Naruto IP is built on, that strength and accomplishments take effort, and a lot of it. And therefore, if Kawaki were to fly off the handle and not think about the consequences of his actions, which would eventually lead to the destruction of Konoha, that would tie its roots directly back to Himawari's vase. And therefore, after the combined forces of Boruto and Kawaki defeat Jura, and then Boruto defeats Kawaki, key talking point will A, be the release of Naruto, and B, be the rebuilding of Konoha, the onus of which will fall onto Kawaki, much in the same way that the onus of repairing Himawari's vase fell onto Kawaki. And that's what I believe the future of Boruto is going to look like. However, unfortunately, the only thing that this future that I've envisioned doesn't answer is why Boruto's able to use his karma marking in the battle against Kawaki. Because if it's being established that Jura is actively trying to not destroy Konoha, then unfortunately for all of my young lord lovers out there, Boruto and Kawaki unfortunately have an equal chance of being the people who end up destroying Konoha, as the destruction of Konoha could just as easily be tied to Boroshiki or even possibly Shibai through the medium of Boruto as it could be to Kawaki. But to flesh out those points, we're gonna need an entirely separate video. So make sure you're liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and banging that noti bell. And while you're down there, tell me what you think about the protocol that's been established to take care of Jura. Do you believe that it's gonna hold? Do you believe that Jura is gonna become a citizen of Konoha? Or do you believe the end times are upon us through the medium of a three-way tumultuous battle? And I've done my closing section out of order now, which means I'm directionless and I have no idea what to do or how to close this video. Goodbye.